Hello folks, today we're going to do a little bit of a trim update on the 7 ports tank. And this tank has been doing good, and in fact, before I trimmed this, this has been trimmed already, and really the only trimming I did was one particular plant. It was growing up and overshading this whole thing. Also, as a quick note, that CO2, the initial CO2 that I set up, is still bubbling. It probably needs to be replaced. It most likely needs to be replaced, but there's still bubbles coming out, so I assume something's happening in there. That's been connected to this since the 20 gallon was removed. So it's actually going in here. And after introducing this into here, the plants started going crazy. Especially I've got one particular plant that just grows like crazy, and it had covered up almost the entire thing, and it was really shading out this whole aquarium. Now, with it like that, it looked amazing. Like, it was a really, really fun way to display this tank. And so I've kept the plant in place, but I did like trim it way, way back. It'll grow up again in the next couple of months and look probably very much the same. It'll be interesting to see if it does. Typically what you do with these plants is you chop the top of it off, you pull the bottom of it out, and then you take that top and you plant it back into the substrate. This particular plant was really, really difficult to plant back into the substrate, so I ended up just kind of chopping the top off, and there's still a substantial amount of it, and it didn't look like it was all dead down low, so I just left it, and hopefully it'll just kind of grow back that way. I'm going to try it at least and see. Every stem plant works a little bit differently. Most of them, though, that's the key, is you just chop the top of it off, pull the rest of it out, which can get messy, and then put the bottom part or the top part back in. And that way you get really nice looking plants all the way up. I encountered a major issue when I was getting this shaker tank set up and ready. If you remember on the harvest update, I was going around and pulling plants. I pulled a lot of Anubias, like way, way, way more Anubias than I really needed, just because it was time to trim so many different things. And I ended up with a 5 gallon bucket full of it. Well, I wasn't sure what to do with it at the time, so I just threw a lid on it and I put it in my garage. Now, the temperature's fine in the garage. The lid was on it mostly to keep the cat out of it and to keep it from evaporating down and like killing some leaves and stuff. I thought it was the best way to kind of keep everything nice and moist in there. And like some leaves were coming up out of the water, so I figured if I put the lid on it, it would keep the humidity real tight in there, and it would be fine. Then a couple of days went by. I planted the tank, but the Anubias was kind of a different part of that project, so I was kind of stashing it away. I pulled it out about 5 or 6 days later to try and kind of evaluate how it was doing and maybe get it moved into some other spot. And it had all melted. It melted bad. Like, I lost probably all of it. A whole 5 gallon bucket of Anubias. I don't know how much money that's worth. Probably a lot. Ouch. It really, really stung. I took the old 20 gallon that's still in the garage, and I filled it up full of water. I put the Anubias in there in a light, and I pulled the ones that were just like completely melted out, and now I've got the ones that kind of had leaves that still had some, maybe could survive. I set all of them out, and I've got them in my little nursery trying to kind of nurse them back to health. I don't know if it's going to work. In fact, they've continued to degrade and get worse. There was a terrible smell of rotten eggs, and I wondered if some of the concentrated dechlorinator maybe took a part in killing it, or if it got an ammonia spike when it was all shoved in there together, or something happened. Anyway, it was terrible. I rinsed everything off, and I put it in the tank with some fresh water and stuff, so hopefully, and it doesn't stink the same way, so hopefully that part's over. And hello, this is Sean from the future. It's been about a week since I did all the work on this. It's still looking good. Of course, all I did was basically remove the top of one plant. But it is growing back already. It is already like on a comeback and stuff. And it looks like I did this just in time to not have any adverse effects. But most importantly, I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about melt. So why does Anubias melt? Well, after having a little bit more time to look this over, in fact, I was stuck in an airport in New York for quite a bit of time this weekend. So I was able to take a look and do a little bit of research. In fact, the first link I found was from the aquariumplantsfactory. And they've got a whole article about why Anubias can melt. Let's run down a couple of those reasons. Apparently, Anubias can melt from dramatic changes in water parameters like pH, temperature, etc. Excess nutrients can overwhelm the rhizomes if they can't grow the way they're supposed to and they get overwhelmed. Very low light. Anubias are typically low light plants, but if they don't get any light at all, they could get stressed out and begin to melt. Water flow, apparently extremes in water flow aren't great for Anubias. Poor water quality, such as excess pollutants or excess nutrients in the water, could trigger a melt. This also could be part of what was going on in the bucket because there was sort of a sulfur smell when I opened the lid. Planting in the substrate, sometimes taking a rhizome and plucking it and pushing it down into the substrate will cause that part of the rhizome to melt or could trigger a melt that cascades throughout the whole plant. I haven't had as much problem with that, but I do tend to try to bury the roots and just get the rhizome right at the surface. The biggest shocker on here is the last one, and that's glue. So if you glue the rhizome, it could cause that not to be able to grow and trigger a melt. So that's something I haven't really heard before. I guess when you typically use that is maybe when you first start an aquarium, if you want to put Anubias someplace that doesn't have a nook or a cranny to wedge it into, you could glue it. And it seems like I have glued it in the past, but I'm not sure how successful it was. What this article recommends anyway is gluing some of the roots maybe instead of the rhizome. So the rhizome's sort of the mothership. If you kind of keep it safe, it can make new roots if those roots are too pinned down or restricted. Or maybe they can grow where the rhizome couldn't because that part of the stem doesn't really expand. I also reached out to Tom Barr, who's sort of just a cherished plant geek in the community, who very kindly took a second to answer my question too. And I had asked him if the darkness was a contributing factor. He says most likely no. Anaerobic water soaking. Plants need to respire. Adding a lot of plants and organic matter to the water is ripe for anaerobic conditions. So probably they suffocated. And that's a hard lesson to learn, but boy, I'll never do it quite like that again. All right, so here is the very latest as of June 1st. Just went in here and took a look at this. It's a near total loss, but as an inspiring note, life does find a way. I have seen amazingly some growing off these rhizomes. A couple of these rhizomes still have potential. This is the way I found most of the plants, though, with a bunch of dead leaves. I trimmed all the dead leaves off, leaving few leaves, at least one if I could, to try to develop this rhizome back and kind of bring them back from the dead, because of course I leave no Anubias behind. If I can save it, I'm going to save it. I'm doing the best I can. So here's a little bit of a bright outcome. Not everything died, but just 99.9%. If you're going to trim your Anubias and gather up a whole bunch of them, just go ahead and put them in another tank or another holding tank or something else. Do not shade them away in complete darkness for several days, because boy, I lost a lot of plants and I'm really sad about it. Luckily, I've got a lot more. I can continue my project. The shaker is planted and it's starting to get into this diatom phase where it's got algae everywhere. I've been kind of gently picking algae out of the plants and stuff. I'll include a full breakdown of the shaker once I finally do my planted tank video. I think I'm going to wait till I get all the way through and so I can show the planting and then some progress, at least some progress after the melt, after all the bad stuff happens. And that's the bad stuff that always happens in a planted tank. At least that's what I'm telling myself to get through the day. So maybe next month we'll be able to talk about the shaker some more. Although this is a little less interesting without that cool shade on the top, that kind of tree-like look. I do appreciate how bright it is in here. I'm sure the plants that were slowly dying out all the way through the back of this really appreciate getting some light. I noticed my fish a lot more that seem to be doing some breeding behaviors and stuff. Maybe they like that water change or something. Still have not seen any babies out of these goodids, but hopefully they do reproduce soon. And folks, that's all I got for you today. Until next time, follow your bliss, keep a clean tank, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.